Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. The handle resisted under my grip, offering no hint of the usual click. Stepping inside, the air felt still, as though holding its breath alongside me. Footfalls on the carpet should have whispered back some familiarity, but each step was swallowed by the room. A photograph on the mantel seemed out of focus, as if it couldn't decide which memory it intended to preserve. My fingers brushed over the light switch, expecting the comforting glow, but darkness held its ground. Eyes settled on a shadow that never shifted, questioning whether it was ever meant to be there at all. I keep writing this down because the doctors say it helps. They say memory works like water finding its way through cracks, that if I keep pressing against the walls in my mind, something will give. But what comes back isn't water, it's fragments of glass, each one cutting deeper than the last. I remember the room now, but not when I was there or why I went inside. The carpet was burgundy, thick enough to muffle sound. My bare feet sank into it, and that's when I realized I wasn't wearing shoes. When had I taken them off? The question hangs in my throat like smoke. There was a hum, not electrical, not mechanical, something alive but wrong, like a voice that had forgotten how to form words. It came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. I can still feel it sometimes when I wake up, that frequency crawling under my skin. The photograph on the mantel showed faces I should have recognized, but their eyes were too bright, their smiles stretched too wide, as if someone had pulled the corners of their mouths with invisible strings. I reached for it and my hand passed through empty air. The frame was there, but my fingers couldn't find it. I think I called out, my voice echoed back, changed, deeper, like it was coming from someone else's throat. The sound bounced off walls that seemed farther away than they should have been. How big was that room? I remember walking for what felt like hours, but the furniture never moved, never got closer or farther away. The shadow by the window wasn't cast by anything. I checked. I walked around it, studied the angles of light, but nothing in the room could have made that shape. It was tall, motionless, perfectly still in a way that living things never are. Even dead things shift slightly, settle, give in to gravity. This didn't. My skin felt tight, like it was shrinking around me. The air tasted metallic, copper pennies dissolving on my tongue. I touched my face and my fingers came away wet, but I wasn't crying. The moisture was warm, sticky. I held my hand up to catch what little light filtered through the curtains, and the liquid looked dark, too dark. The hum grew louder. I remember running, my feet slapped against hardwood now, not carpet. When had the floor changed? The room stretched ahead of me, longer than any room should be, and my breath came in sharp gasps that echoed like breaking glass. Behind me, footsteps that weren't mine matched my rhythm perfectly, always exactly one beat behind. The door I had entered through was gone. I pressed my palms against smooth walls, searching for the frame, for the handle that had resisted my grip. My fingernails scraped against paint that felt wet, leaving tracks that disappeared as soon as I made them. There was a window. Through it I could see myself standing in the room, but I was different, taller. My hair was longer, my clothes were different colors. The other me turned and looked directly at me through the glass, and its mouth moved in words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "You're not supposed to be here yet." The photograph was in my hands now, though I didn't remember picking it up. The faces were clearer, and I recognized them as people I had never met but somehow knew intimately. They were all looking at something behind me, their expressions shifting from joy to terror in the space between heartbeats. I turned around. The shadow had moved. It stood directly behind me now, close enough that I should have felt its breath, its warmth, something. But there was only cold, a cold so complete it felt like drowning in ice water. I tried to step backward and found I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor, or maybe the floor was climbing up my legs, swallowing me inch by inch. The hum wasn't a hum anymore. It was singing, a lullaby I remembered from somewhere deep and dark and safe. A voice I had trusted once before I learned that trust could be weaponized. The words were in a language I didn't recognize but understood perfectly, and they were telling me to sleep, to let go, to stop fighting what was always meant to happen. My reflection in the window was screaming now, pounding its fists against the glass. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from where its hands struck, and through the fractures I could see other rooms, other versions of myself trapped behind other windows, all of us trying to warn each other of something we couldn't quite remember. The metallic taste was stronger now. I swallowed, and it burned my throat, left me gasping. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the burgundy carpet again, staring up at a ceiling that moved like water. The photograph lay beside me, but now it was blank, just an empty frame holding nothing. I think I died in that room, or maybe I'm still there, and this is just another window, another reflection trying to piece together what happened. The doctors say I was found 3 days later in a place that doesn't exist, in a building that was demolished before I was born. They say trauma can make the mind create elaborate stories to protect itself from truth. But I can still taste the copper. I can still hear that lullaby humming just under the frequency of normal sound. And sometimes when I'm writing this down, I catch my reflection moving differently than I am, mouthing words I'm not speaking, trying to tell me something urgent and terrible. The shadow visits me now, not in dreams, but in the spaces between waking and sleeping, when my guard is down and the walls in my mind grow thin. It stands at the foot of my bed, patient as stone, waiting for something I don't understand. Its presence feels like coming home and like drowning at the same time. I remember the taste of my own fear, thick and sour on my tongue. I remember the sound my heart made when it finally stopped racing and fell into a rhythm that wasn't quite right, like a song played in the wrong key. I remember the moment I realized I wasn't alone in that room, had never been alone, that something had been waiting there long before I turned the handle. The doctors ask me to describe what I see when I close my eyes. I tell them about the room, about the shadow, about the photograph that held faces I loved and feared in equal measure. They nod and scribble notes and increase my medication, but they don't ask about the most important thing, the thing that ties all the fragments together. They don't ask about the door that appeared after I stopped trying to leave. It was small, child-sized, set into the wall where the window used to be. The wood was dark, almost black, and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The handle was warm under my palm, like living skin, and when I turned it, I could hear something on the other side breathing in rhythm with my own lungs. I opened that door, I know I did, even though I can't remember what was beyond it. But whatever I found there is still with me, curled up behind my ribs like a sleeping animal. Sometimes it stirs and I taste copper again. Sometimes it whispers in that language I understand but can't speak, telling me stories about the space between spaces, about rooms that exist only when someone is lost enough to find them. The photograph is on my nightstand now. The doctors say I brought nothing with me when I was found, but there it sits, its empty frame reflecting light that comes from no source I can identify. I've tried to throw it away, but it always returns, patient as the shadow, waiting for the right moment to show me what it once held. My handwriting is changing. I notice it more each time I write this down. The letters are becoming sharper, more angular, like someone else is guiding my pen. The words flow faster than I can think them, as if they're being dictated by a voice I can't quite hear. The room was never empty. I understand that now. It was full of things that don't cast shadows, that don't reflect in mirrors, that exist in the spaces between seconds. I was the empty thing, the hollow vessel that wandered in without invitation and stayed too long. But I brought something back with me. It lives in my peripheral vision now, in the corner of my eye where sight becomes suggestion. It's growing stronger, more solid, feeding on the fragments of memory I keep writing down. Each word I put to paper makes it more real, more present. The hum is back. It's coming from inside my chest now, vibrating through my ribcage and into my fingertips as I write. The frequency is changing, becoming more complex, more like actual music, like a song I used to know before I forgot how to sing. I can see my reflection in the window across the room, but it's not writing. It's watching me with eyes that are too bright, too knowing. Its mouth is moving in that silent language again, trying to warn me about something that's already happened, something that's still happening. The door is opening again. I can hear it creaking on hinges that don't exist, feel the draft of air that smells like copper and old photographs, and the space beneath beds where children hide from things that are definitely real. Something is coming through. Something is. The pen keeps moving, but I'm not controlling it anymore. The words are writing themselves, telling a story I don't remember living but can't deny knowing. The shadow at the foot of my bed is no longer waiting. It's reaching, extending fingers that are too long, too thin, toward the photograph that's beginning to show faces again. I recognize them now. They're all me, every version of myself that ever opened a door that should have stayed closed, that ever stepped into a room that existed only for the lost and the seeking. We're all trapped behind glass, all trying to warn the others, all failing to remember the most important thing. We never left that room. We're all still there, we'll always be there, adding our voices to the hum that calls to others who are ready to turn handles that resist their grip, ready to step into air that holds its breath, ready to find photographs of faces they should recognize but don't. The writing is stopping now, not because I'm choosing to stop, but because the story is complete, the circle is closing. The thing that came through the door is settling into the space behind my eyes, and I can feel my reflection in the window beginning to move independently, beginning to mouth warnings to someone else who won't be able to hear them. The room is calling again. I can hear it humming just under the frequency of normal sound, patient as shadows, waiting for the next lost thing to find its way inside. And I know, with the certainty of someone who has lived this story before and will live it again, that I'm about to get up from this chair, walk to a door that shouldn't exist, and turn a handle that will resist under my grip. The memories are getting stronger now, story 2. The handle turned, yet the door didn't sway. A draft brushed past, colder than it should have been, whispering secrets in looping patterns. The calendar on the wall had the same date printed twice, ink bleeding into tomorrow. My reflection in the mirror hesitated, lips forming a word I hadn't spoken. I reached for the light switch, fingers grazing a chill. The room dimmed anyway. In the corner a book lay open, pages fluttering without a breeze. I knew the cover was supposed to be closed. Yet there it was, revealing words I'd never read. These things happen every day now. Small impossibilities that stack upon each other like cards in a house built by trembling hands. The coffee maker turns itself on at the same time each morning, brewing a cup I never requested. The sound it makes is different though deeper, like it's grinding something other than beans, something metallic, something that shouldn't be there. I haven't slept properly in weeks, not since I started remembering. The bed feels wrong, like the mattress has shifted beneath me, conforming to a shape that isn't quite mine. When I close my eyes, there's this pressure behind my eyelids, gentle but persistent, as if something is trying to push its way through from the other side. The darkness isn't empty anymore, it hums. My neighbors avoid eye contact now. They used to wave, exchange pleasantries about the weather or weekend plans. Now they hurry past with their heads down, clutching their children a little tighter when they see me coming. I tried to tell one of them about the lights, about how they appear in my windows even when every switch is off. She nodded politely and made an excuse about needing to get home. Her face was pale, stretched thin with the kind of fear people wear when they're trying very hard not to believe something they know is true. The doctor prescribed pills for anxiety, little white tablets that rattle in their orange bottle like teeth in a skull. I take them sometimes, but they don't stop the humming. If anything, they make it clearer, more defined. It's not coming from the walls or the electrical outlets like I first thought. It's coming from somewhere much deeper, somewhere that exists in the space between what is and what shouldn't be. The photographs on my phone have changed. Pictures I took months ago now show things that weren't there when I pressed the shutter. Shadows that fall at impossible angles, reflections in windows that don't match what's in front of them. In one image, taken during what I remember as a perfectly ordinary afternoon, there's a figure standing in the background, tall, motionless, wearing something that might be clothing but doesn't quite hang right on its frame. The quality around this figure is different, blurred in a way that suggests movement even though it appears completely still. I've tried deleting these images, but they reappear, sometimes in different folders, sometimes with slight variations as if they're evolving, becoming more clear with each iteration. The figure is always there, always watching, always just far enough away that I can't make out any features, but I know it sees me. I can feel its attention like a weight pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. The memory comes back in fragments now, sharp and sudden like glass breaking in reverse. I remember the silence first, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that absorbed sound, swallowed it whole and left nothing but the taste of copper in the air. The night had been ordinary until it wasn't. I was alone, which wasn't unusual. I often sought solitude in places where the city's constant noise couldn't follow. The campsite was remote, nestled between hills that rolled away into darkness. I had set up my tent near a cluster of pine trees, their branches forming a natural windbreak. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to keep the immediate darkness at bay. I remember feeling peaceful, content in the way that only comes when you're far enough from civilization that its problems can't reach you. Then the silence came, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had thrown a switch that controlled every cricket, every owl, every small creature that makes the night alive. Even the wind stopped, leaving the air so still it felt solid. I looked up from the book I'd been reading by firelight and realized I couldn't hear my own breathing. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before, not harsh like a searchlight or warm like a campfire. This light seemed to bend around itself, creating shadows that moved independently of their source. It hovered above the tree line, maybe 50 feet off the ground, pulsing with a rhythm that matched something deep inside my chest, my heartbeat perhaps, or something more fundamental than that. I should have been afraid. Every instinct should have told me to run, to pack up my things and drive back to the safety of streetlights and locked doors. Instead, I found myself standing, walking toward the light with steps I didn't remember deciding to take. The ground beneath my feet felt different, softer, as if the earth itself had become uncertain of its own solidity. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something organic that reminded me of the smell that clings to your hands after handling old coins. My vision began to blur around the edges, not from tears or fatigue, but as if reality itself was losing focus. The light grew larger as I approached, or perhaps I was shrinking. Perspective became meaningless. I remember reaching out, my hand moving without conscious direction. The light responded, reaching back with tendrils of luminescence that felt warm against my skin. Where it touched me, I felt a tingling sensation that spread up my arm and into my chest, filling me with a strange sense of recognition, as if I was remembering something I had never learned. Then there was the figure. It stood at the edge of the light's influence, tall and impossibly still. Its outline wavered like heat shimmer, making it difficult to focus on any specific details. What I thought might be clothing moved without wind, rippling in patterns that suggested a geometry I couldn't quite grasp. It didn't approach, didn't speak, didn't make any gesture of acknowledgement. It simply observed, and in its observation, I felt myself becoming something other than what I had been. The world tilted then, or perhaps I did. The ground rushed up to meet me, but instead of impact, there was only a gentle dissolution, as if I was sinking into water that had the consistency of light. My last clear memory of that moment is the sound of my own voice, speaking words in a language I didn't recognize, answering questions I couldn't hear. When awareness returned, I was lying beside the cold remains of my campfire. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too bright, too saturated. My book lay open beside me, its pages fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. The words on the page were in English, but they seemed foreign, as if the meaning had been drained from them overnight. But even before that night, there had been signs. Subtle things I dismissed as coincidence or imagination. The radio in my car would sometimes pick up transmissions that weren't quite music and weren't quite speech. Static that formed patterns, rhythms that seemed almost like language. I would find myself listening intently, trying to decode meaning from the interference, until the signal would suddenly clear and normal programming would resume. Electronic devices began behaving strangely around me. Streetlights would flicker as I passed beneath them. My phone would display the time incorrectly, showing hours that didn't exist or dates that hadn't arrived yet. Automatic doors would open before I reached them and close after I had passed, as if they were responding to something that walked beside me, invisible and patient. I started having dreams that felt more real than waking. In them I would find myself in vast spaces that defied architectural logic, rooms with walls that curved in directions that shouldn't exist. The air in these dream spaces was thick with the same ozone scent I would later encounter at the campsite, and always somewhere in the distance I could hear that humming. Not unpleasant, but persistent, like a lullaby sung by something that had never learned the proper melody. In these dreams I was never alone. Figures moved at the periphery of my vision, always just out of direct sight. When I tried to turn toward them, they would shift, maintaining their position just beyond the edge of perception. They cast no shadows despite the presence of light, and their footsteps, when I could hear them, had a quality that suggested they weren't quite touching the ground. I would wake from these dreams with the taste of metal in my mouth and a strange soreness in my muscles, as if I had been walking for hours. Sometimes there would be dirt under my fingernails, though I couldn't remember being outside. Once I found small stones in my pockets, smooth and warm to the touch, that seemed to pulse with their own internal light when the room was dark. The dreams began weeks before the camping trip, occurring with increasing frequency as that night approached. Looking back now, I realized they weren't dreams at all, but memories of something that hadn't happened yet. Time, I've learned, isn't as linear as we pretend it is. Sometimes the effect arrives before the cause, like ripples moving backward toward the stone that created them. Even earlier, before the dreams began, there were moments of displacement. I would be walking down a familiar street and suddenly find myself somewhere else entirely, with no memory of how I had arrived there. These episodes lasted only seconds, but they left me disoriented and nauseous, with the lingering sensation that I had just returned from somewhere very far away. The first time it happened, I was leaving the grocery store. I remember pushing my cart through the automatic doors, and then without transition, I was standing in an empty parking lot 3 blocks away. The sun had shifted position, suggesting that more time had passed than seemed possible. My cart was gone along with my groceries, but I found my car keys clutched in my hand so tightly they had left impressions in my palm. These episodes increased in frequency and duration. I would lose minutes, then hours, returning to awareness in places I had no reason to be. A park bench in a neighborhood I'd never visited. The waiting room of a medical building I'd never entered. Once I came back to myself standing in the middle of an empty field, surrounded by crops I couldn't identify, with the taste of something sweet and metallic coating my tongue. But before any of this began, there was a day that seemed perfectly normal, unremarkable in every way except for how peaceful it felt. I remember waking naturally, without an alarm, feeling more rested than I had in months. The sunlight streaming through my windows was warm and golden, painting everything in my room with a soft glow that made even the most mundane objects seem beautiful. I made coffee that morning, real coffee, not the instant variety I usually relied on. The smell filled my kitchen with a richness that seemed to promise good things ahead. I sat at my table, reading a book whose title I can no longer recall, feeling genuinely content for the first time in years. The world felt solid and reliable, governed by laws that made sense and populated by people who meant what they said. That evening, I decided to plan the camping trip. It wasn't a sudden impulse, but a gradual recognition that I needed time away from the constant noise of modern life. I spread maps across my table, tracing routes with my finger, looking for places marked by nothing but green spaces and elevation lines. The campsite I eventually chose was recommended by a website that no longer seems to exist, described in reviews I can no longer find. As I made my preparations, gathering equipment and supplies, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Not excitement exactly, but a quiet certainty that something important was about to happen. I packed my car with unusual care, double-checking everything, as if I was preparing for a journey much longer than a simple weekend getaway. The drive to the campsite was peaceful, the kind of drive where time seems to stretch and compress simultaneously. The landscape grew gradually wilder as I left the city behind, buildings giving way to trees, pavement yielding to dirt roads that wound through hills like sleeping giants. I remember thinking that I was driving towards something, not just away from the familiar chaos of my daily life. Now, as I sit in my room with its impossible drafts and bleeding calendars, I understand that day wasn't an ending or a beginning. It was a moment of perfect balance, the last instant before everything I thought I knew about the world shifted into a new configuration. The calm before not a storm, but a revelation that some storms never truly end. They're still watching. I can feel their attention like a physical presence, patient and implacable. The humming continues, growing stronger each day, and sometimes in the space between sleeping and waking, I think I understand what they're trying to tell me. Story 3. The faucet dripped once, then stopped, the silence more jarring than the sound. My reflection in the window seemed to sway, rippling as if cast on water. Every step I retraced through the dimly lit room felt misaligned, like the floor had shifted, growing unfamiliar. The air carried a scent I couldn't place, elusive yet clinging to the edges of my consciousness. I reached for the door, my hand brushing the wood, and it was warm to the touch, a warmth that shouldn't have been. I know now there's no going back. The changes have settled into my bones like sediment in still water. My fingertips trace patterns on surfaces that respond in ways they shouldn't, leaving impressions that fade too slowly. The world feels thin here, stretched like fabric pulled taut. When I blink, the darkness behind my eyelids shows me things that haven't happened yet, or perhaps things that happened long ago. The distinction no longer matters. But I remember the moment just before this acceptance. I was standing in the hallway, watching the wallpaper breathe. The pattern, those small, repeating flowers seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the subtle rise and fall beneath my touch. The paper was damp, though the house had been dry for days. My fingers came away clean, but the sensation lingered, that wetness that wasn't quite water. The floorboards beneath my feet had begun their soft complaints by then. Each step produced a sound like distant conversation, muffled voices speaking words I couldn't quite catch. I found myself pausing between steps, straining to understand, but the harder I listened, the more the sounds retreated into ordinary creaking. Still, I knew what I had heard. The house was trying to tell me something. Before that, I was in the kitchen, staring at the coffee cup I'd filled but couldn't remember pouring. The liquid inside was perfectly black, no cream, no sugar, though I never drink it that way. Steam rose from the surface in spirals that seemed too deliberate, too controlled. I lifted the cup to my lips and tasted nothing, not bitter, not hot, just an absence where flavor should have been. The ceramic felt wrong against my mouth, too smooth, like it was made of something that only resembled a cup. The refrigerator hummed behind me, but the sound was off-key, discordant. When I turned to look, the appliance appeared normal, white and solid, but the hum continued to burrow into my skull. I opened the door and found everything exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow rearranged. The milk carton faced the wrong direction. The apples had shifted to the left. Small changes that shouldn't have mattered but felt like violations of some unspoken rule. Moving backward through my memories, I see myself entering the kitchen that morning, though morning feels like the wrong word for the gray light filtering through the windows. The shadows fell at angles that defied the sun's position. I had walked through the doorway and stopped, sensing immediately that something was different. The air itself felt heavier, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. The night before comes back to me now in fragments. I was lying in bed, listening to the house settle around me. But houses don't settle with such purpose, such rhythm. The sounds came in waves, a creak here, a whisper of air through a crack there, then silence so complete it hurt my ears. I pulled the blankets higher, but they felt thin, insubstantial, as if they were made of shadow rather than fabric. Through the bedroom wall I heard water running, not the harsh rush of a fully open tap, but the gentle flow of water moving with intention. I knew all the faucets were off. I had checked them before bed, a habit ingrained by years of living alone. Yet the sound persisted, sometimes growing louder, sometimes fading to barely a whisper, but never stopping entirely. I rose from bed and followed the sound, my bare feet finding the cold hardwood in the darkness. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, each step taking me further from my bedroom door while somehow bringing me no closer to the bathroom. The sound of water grew clearer as I walked, and beneath it, I began to hear something else, a soft splashing, as if someone were gently disturbing the surface of a pool. The bathroom door stood ajar, and pale light leaked through the gap. Not electric light, but something softer, more organic. I pushed the door open and found the bathtub full of water that reflected nothing. The surface was perfectly still, yet I could hear the gentle lapping of small waves against the porcelain sides. Steam rose from the water, but the air remained cold against my skin. I knelt beside the tub and dipped my fingers into the water. It felt warm, inviting, but when I pulled my hand back, it was completely dry. No droplets clung to my skin, no wetness remained, yet I could still feel the phantom sensation of water between my fingers. The reflection that should have shown my face looking down into the tub was absent, leaving only that strange, sourceless light dancing on the surface. Going further back, I remember the afternoon when I first noticed the sounds in the walls. I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard what sounded like footsteps moving through the space between the walls. Not the scurrying of mice or the settling of old wood, but deliberate, measured steps that matched no pattern I recognized. The sounds moved from room to room, always just out of sight, always just quiet enough that I could convince myself I was imagining them. I followed the sounds through the house, pressing my ear to different walls, trying to pinpoint their source. In the dining room, the footsteps seemed to pause directly behind the wall where I stood listening. I held my breath, and for a moment I thought I heard breathing on the other side, slow, steady inhalations and exhalations that seemed to mirror my own. The wallpaper in that room had always been unremarkable. A simple pattern of small roses connected by thin green vines. But as I stood there listening, I noticed that some of the roses seemed darker than others, as if they were wet or stained. I ran my fingers over the darker spots, and they felt different, softer, more yielding, like the paper had been soaked and was still damp beneath the surface. Days earlier, I had begun to notice that objects in the house were not quite where I remembered leaving them. Small displacements. At first, a book moved an inch to the left, a chair turned at a slightly different angle, a picture frame tilted just enough to catch the light differently. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was simply misremembering, but the changes became more obvious, more deliberate. The mirror in the hallway was the first to show me something that wasn't there. I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision and turned to look, but saw only my own reflection staring back. Yet for just a moment, I could have sworn there had been someone else in the glass, a figure standing just behind my shoulder, close enough that I should have felt their breath on my neck. I began to avoid looking directly into mirrors, but they seemed to multiply throughout the house. Reflective surfaces appeared where none had been before: the dark screen of the television, the surface of a glass of water, even the polished wood of the dining table began to show distorted images of rooms that looked almost, but not quite, like the ones I knew. The first real sign that something had changed came when I noticed the house had grown quieter. Not the comfortable quiet of solitude, but an oppressive silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than simply lacking it. My footsteps became muffled, my voice sounded flat and distant even to my own ears, and the usual background noises of daily life, the hum of appliances, the tick of clocks, the settling of wood, all faded to whispers. It was during this unnatural quiet that I first heard the other sounds, the ones that didn't belong. They came from directions that made no sense: above me when I was on the top floor, below me when I stood in the basement, from inside walls that were too thin to contain anything larger than wiring and insulation. The sounds were organic, wet like something moving through water or mud, always just loud enough to be noticed, but never clear enough to identify. But the true beginning, the moment when everything started to change, was so simple I almost missed it entirely. I was walking through the house, going about my ordinary routine, when I noticed a single drop of water on the bathroom floor. It sat there, perfectly round, catching the light from the window like a tiny lens. There was no obvious source, no leak in the ceiling, no splash from the sink, no condensation from the shower. I knelt down and touched the drop with my fingertip. It was warm, warmer than it should have been, and when I lifted my finger, the water clung to my skin with an odd viscosity, like it was reluctant to let go. I wiped my finger on a towel, but the sensation remained that strange warmth, that unnatural adhesion. The spot where the drop had been stayed damp long after I cleaned it, and when I looked closely, I could see that the water had left a mark, a tiny stain that seemed to go deeper than the surface of the tile. That single drop of impossible water, appearing from nowhere, clinging too tightly, staying too warm, that was where it all began. Such a small thing, easily dismissed, easily forgotten. But I should have known then that some changes start with the smallest alterations, the most innocent intrusions. That drop was the first breach, the initial crack in the wall between what was and what was becoming. Everything that followed, all the strangeness that consumed my world and transformed my understanding of what was possible, began with that one warm drop of water that had no right to exist. Story 4. It wasn't the first time the garage light flickered in the evening. I sometimes noticed the faint hum that accompanied it, a sound that was oddly comforting in its predictability. The recycling bin stood slightly ajar, a few cans peeking out, but everything seemed to be in the place it was supposed to be. The garden tools leaned against the wall as usual, their shadows long and undisturbed. I picked up a stray leaf from the floor, recalling how the wind crept in sometimes through the cracks we never bothered to seal. I left the door open a bit, in case the breeze wanted to return. But that was before I started finding things that didn't belong to me, before I realized there were gaps in my memory, clean cuts where something should be but isn't. I know something happened. My body knows it too. There's this constant feeling of having forgotten something important, like when you walk into a room and can't remember why you came there, except this feeling never goes away. I've been trying to piece it together for weeks now. The fragments come in waves, triggered by the strangest things, a particular frequency of static on the radio, the way light refracts through my kitchen window at certain angles, the smell of new plastic mixed with something metallic and cold. I found the first clue in my phone, a voice memo I don't remember recording. The timestamp shows it was made during a period I thought I'd spent sleeping, but when I listen to it, I hear my own voice whispering words I don't recognize. The audio quality is strange, like I was speaking through water or from inside a tunnel. Behind my voice, there's something else, a rhythmic pulsing that makes my teeth ache when I focus on it too closely. The frequency is wrong, my recorded voice says. Everything is shifted. The air tastes different here. Here, but where is here? I was in my house. I remember going to bed that night, remember brushing my teeth, remember checking the locks on the doors. But this voice memo suggests I was somewhere else entirely. The second fragment came when I was organizing my desk drawer. Tucked between old receipts and rubber bands, I found a small object I'd never seen before. It's about the size of a marble, perfectly smooth, and it vibrates in my palm with an irregular rhythm. Not constantly, just occasional tremors that seem to respond to my heartbeat. When I hold it up to the light, it doesn't cast a shadow the way it should. The shadow is there, but it's the wrong shape, angular where the object is round. Touching it brings back flashes, not complete memories, just sensory impressions that feel both foreign and familiar. I remember standing in a space that felt too large, where my footsteps echoed wrong. The sound would bounce back at me from impossible directions, as if the walls were moving or the floor was tilted in ways my eyes couldn't detect. There were lights, not normal lights, but bursts of illumination that seemed to come from inside my own vision. They would flicker in patterns that almost made sense, like a language I was on the verge of understanding but could never quite grasp. Each flash left afterimages that lingered too long, burning geometric shapes into my retinas. I found more recordings, this time not just my voice but other sounds, electronic tones that shift frequency in ways that make my skin crawl. Static that sounds almost like breathing, if breathing could be digitized and played at the wrong speed. In one file, there's a sound that might be voices, but they're speaking in overlapping layers, creating harmonies that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. The strangest thing is how these recordings affect me. Listening to them doesn't just trigger memories, it changes my present reality. After playing one of the files, I noticed my reflection in the bathroom mirror was slightly out of sync with my movements. Just a fraction of a second delay, but enough to make me question whether I was looking at myself or something that was learning to mimic me. The air in my house has started to smell different too. That scent of new plastic and cold blood that I can't quite place but somehow recognize. It's strongest in corners, in spaces where shadows gather during the day. I've started avoiding those areas, but the smell follows me anyway, clinging to my clothes and hair. Another fragment surfaces when I'm washing dishes. The warm water on my hands triggers a memory of cold. Not just cold air, but a cold that seemed to come from inside things, as if the molecules themselves were slowing down around me. I remember reaching out to touch something, and my hand passing through what looked like solid matter. The sensation was like dipping my fingers into thick liquid that had no temperature at all. In this memory fragment, I'm not alone. There are presences around me, not quite visible, but undeniably there. They move in my peripheral vision, always just outside the range of direct sight. When I try to turn my head to look at them, they're already gone, but I can feel the displacement of air, the subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that comes from something large moving quickly. The recordings are getting clearer, or maybe I'm getting better at understanding them. In the latest one I found, buried in a folder I don't remember creating, my voice is different, calmer, but in a way that doesn't sound like me. It's as if someone else was using my vocal cords, someone who understood things I didn't. The transition is smoother than expected, this other version of me says. The boundaries are more permeable here. Memory retention will be minimal, but the changes are already integrating. Changes, what changes? I study myself in mirrors now, looking for differences, but it's hard to remember exactly what I looked like before. Photographs don't help. They all seem slightly wrong, as if they're pictures of someone who resembles me but isn't quite me. My dreams have become vivid and geometric. I find myself in spaces that follow architectural rules I don't understand, where corridors lead to rooms that are larger inside than the buildings that contain them. The walls pulse with that same irregular rhythm as the object in my drawer, and the air shimmers with frequencies just beyond the range of human hearing. But are they dreams? I wake up with dirt under my fingernails sometimes, though I don't remember gardening. My shoes show wear patterns that don't match the places I remember walking. There are gaps in my day that I can't account for, moments where I'll be doing one thing and suddenly find myself somewhere else with no memory of the transition. The most disturbing fragment came yesterday. I was listening to one of the recordings through headphones when suddenly the sound seemed to bypass my ears entirely and speak directly into my brain. In that moment, I remembered seeing myself from the outside, as if I was floating above my own body, watching as something that looked exactly like me moved through my daily routines. But the thing that looked like me moved wrong. Its gestures were too precise, too calculated. It smiled at appropriate moments, responded to conversations, performed all the actions of a normal person, but there was something mechanical about it, as if it was following a script rather than living spontaneously. The worst part is that I couldn't tell if I was the one floating above, watching the imposter, or if I was the imposter, being watched by something that used to be me. The object in my drawer has started vibrating more frequently. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night to find it pulsing with light, casting those impossible shadows on my bedroom walls. The shadows move independently of the object, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly but seem meaningful in ways I can't articulate. I've tried to research what happened to me, but every search leads to dead ends or information that dissolves from my memory as soon as I read it. It's as if something is actively preventing me from understanding my own experience, editing my thoughts in real time to keep certain knowledge just out of reach. The garage light still flickers, but now I notice it happens in rhythm with the object's vibrations. The recycling bin has moved slightly, though I don't remember touching it. The garden tools cast shadows that are too long for the current angle of the sun, and sometimes I catch them moving in my peripheral vision, adjusting their positions when I'm not looking directly at them. The final fragment is the clearest and the most impossible. I remember standing in that too large space, surrounded by the moving presences, when suddenly everything became perfectly still. The geometric light stopped flashing, the electronic sounds ceased, and in that silence I heard something that makes no sense. I heard my own voice speaking from somewhere behind me, having a conversation with something that responded in harmonics and frequencies. But I was already speaking, already engaged in dialogue, which means there were two of me in that space. Or maybe there was one of me and one of something else that had learned to sound exactly like me. The conversation was about integration, about memory management, about the importance of maintaining continuity during transition periods. My voice, the one behind me, was explaining how to inhabit a human life without disrupting the surface patterns that others would recognize as normal behavior. And the thing with my voice that was having this conversation, the thing that I might have been or might have been becoming, was taking notes. I don't know how long this process took. Time seemed to move differently in that space, flowing in directions that don't exist in normal reality. But I remember the moment when the two versions of my voice synchronized, when the conversation became a monologue, when whatever distinction had existed between me and the thing that sounded like me collapsed into a single point of awareness. That's where the memory ends or begins. I can't tell anymore which direction my recollections flow, whether I'm remembering the past or previewing a future that's already been determined. The recordings have stopped appearing on my phone, but I don't think the process is over. Sometimes I catch myself doing things I don't remember deciding to do, speaking words that feel foreign in my mouth, moving through my daily routines with that same mechanical precision I observed in the floating memory fragment. The object in my drawer is warm now, almost body temperature, and its vibrations have synchronized with my heartbeat so perfectly that I can't tell where it ends and I begin. When I hold it, the world becomes slightly more transparent, as if I'm seeing through multiple layers of reality at once. I still don't know what happened to me in that impossible space, or whether it's still happening, or whether it ever really stopped. The fragments I've recovered might be memories, or they might be instructions, or they might be something else entirely that my human language doesn't have words for. But I know I'm different now, changed in ways that go deeper than memory, deeper than personality, deeper than the basic structures of identity that I used to think were permanent. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between thoughts, I can feel something vast and patient watching through my eyes, learning how to be human by observing the world through my senses. The garage light flickers as I write this, and I realize I'm not sure if I'm the one writing or if I'm the one being written. The distinction seems less important now than it used to. The recycling bin has moved again, just a few inches, but enough to change the geometry of shadows in ways that make the space feel larger than it should be. And in that expanded space, in the corners where the new shadows gather, I can sense those familiar presences, still moving just outside the range of direct perception, still adjusting and calibrating and preparing for the next phase of whatever process I've become part of. The question that haunts me isn't what happened to me in that impossible space. The question is whether it's still happening, whether every moment of my reconstructed life is just another fragment in a larger pattern I'm not equipped to perceive. And whether the thing that's learning to be me is doing a better job of it than I ever did. Story 5. The emergency exit was propped open, contrary to standard protocol. Initial inspection of the premises revealed organized workstations with personal items undisturbed. Files remained neatly stacked on desks, chairs pushed in as if awaiting occupants. An unconsumed meal was noted on the break room table, suggesting abrupt departure. Surveillance footage captured no unusual movements. However, the timestamps displayed sequential gaps. Lighting fixtures were operational, but a single bulb flickered intermittently in the corridor. The air conditioner maintained a consistent temperature. No signs of forced entry were observed, yet the security alarm remained silent, though activated. I want to be clear about something from the start. Nothing happened that night. I mean, nothing really happened. I was just doing my rounds like always, checking the building, making sure everything was secure. It was a normal shift, completely normal. The report makes it sound like something was wrong, but that's just how these things get written up. Bureaucratic language, you know. They have to document everything, even the most mundane details. The emergency exit was probably just propped open by the cleaning crew. They do that sometimes for ventilation. I wouldn't know though, because I didn't actually go near that exit. I stayed on my regular route. I've been working security for years and I know what normal looks like. This was normal. Maybe I was a little tired that night, which could explain why some things seemed off. When you're tired, your mind plays tricks on you, creates patterns where there aren't any, makes you notice things that don't matter. The meal in the break room, for instance, someone probably just forgot their dinner, happens all the time. People get distracted, leave food sitting around. I didn't touch it, didn't even look at it closely. Though I do remember it was still warm when I walked by, not that I touched it or anything. I just happened to notice the steam rising from the container. Barely noticeable steam, really. Could have been my imagination. The surveillance gaps are easily explained too. Technical glitch, probably. These systems aren't perfect. Sometimes they skip a few seconds here and there. It doesn't mean anything was happening during those gaps. I was just walking my route, same as always. Though I do find it strange that the gaps happened exactly when I was moving between the main hallway and the back corridor. But that's just coincidence. I wasn't paying attention to the cameras anyway. I was focused on my job, checking doors, testing locks. Everything was secure. Every single door was locked tight, which is why I don't understand how I ended up in that storage room on the 3rd floor. I mean, I didn't end up there. I never went to the 3rd floor at all that night. I stuck to the ground level like I always do. But if I had gone to the 3rd floor, which I didn't, I would have noticed how quiet it was up there. Not the normal kind of quiet you get in empty buildings. This was different, thicker somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, except there was no ringing, just that heavy, waiting feeling. The flickering light in the corridor was probably just a loose connection. Old building, old wiring, these things happen. I walked under it several times during my rounds and it never bothered me. Though I did notice it wasn't flickering randomly. It had a pattern to it. 3 quick flashes, then darkness for exactly long enough to take 4 steps, then 3 more flashes. I counted without meaning to. but that's just how faulty bulbs behave sometimes, I'm sure. I definitely didn't follow that pattern down the hallway. I wasn't being guided by it or anything like that. I was just doing my job, checking the building systematically. If my footsteps happened to sync up with the light pattern, that was pure coincidence. Though I have to admit, when I stopped walking, the flickering stopped too. But correlation isn't causation, right? That's just how these things work. The temperature was fine throughout the building. The report mentions the air conditioner maintaining consistency, and that's accurate. 72 degrees everywhere I went, except for that one spot near the stairwell where it felt like walking into a refrigerator. But that's normal for buildings like this. Cold spots happen. Air circulation creates pockets of different temperatures. What struck me as odd, though I'm probably overthinking it, was how the cold felt deliberate, not like a draft or poor insulation, more like something was drawing the warmth out of the air on purpose. I could see my breath for just a moment when I passed through that area, but it was probably just the contrast between the heated hallway and the cooler stairwell. My eyes were playing tricks on me. I didn't go up those stairs, I want to make that clear. I had no reason to go to the upper floors, and I didn't. My route covers the ground level only. But I did notice how the stairwell seemed to stretch upward much further than it should have. This is a 4-story building, but looking up from the bottom, it felt like the stairs kept going indefinitely. Just a trick of perspective, obviously. The lighting up there was different, casting shadows that made everything look deeper than it was. The personal items at the workstations were exactly as they should be. Coffee mugs, family photos, desk organizers, all perfectly normal. I didn't disturb anything, didn't even touch the desks as I walked by. Though I couldn't help but notice that all the computer monitors were off, but their screens were warm. Not hot, just warm enough to feel if you held your hand near them, which I didn't do. I just happened to notice when I was checking the area. And the screensavers, when I glimpsed them reflected in the windows, weren't the usual company logo or bouncing shapes. They showed empty hallways that looked exactly like the ones I was walking through. But that's probably just the default screensaver for the security system. Makes sense that it would display camera feeds. Though I couldn't figure out why the figure in the screensaver hallway was wearing the same uniform as me and walking the exact same route I was taking. The chairs being pushed in so neatly struck me as unusual, but only because I've never seen this place so organized. Usually there are a few chairs pulled out, papers scattered around, signs of normal workplace activity. But that night everything was perfectly arranged, like someone had spent considerable time making sure every detail was exactly right, or like everyone had left at exactly the same moment, all pushing in their chairs simultaneously. I found myself moving more quietly than usual, though I can't say why. My footsteps seemed too loud in the silence, so I started walking more carefully, not sneaking exactly, just being considerate of the atmosphere, though there was nobody there to disturb, so I'm not sure why I felt the need to be quiet. The files on the desks were neatly stacked, just like the report says. But what the report doesn't mention is that they were all open to the same page, every single stack on every single desk, page 47 of various documents. I only noticed because I happened to glance down while passing by. The pages all had the same header, something about Protocol 7, but I didn't read any further. Wasn't my business. When I reached the break room, I definitely didn't go inside. I just looked through the doorway to make sure everything was secure. The meal on the table was in a white container, still sealed. Steam was rising from the edges where the lid didn't quite fit. Fresh steam, like it had just been delivered. But the building had been empty for hours before my shift started. I could smell whatever was in that container from the doorway. Something savory with herbs I couldn't identify. It smelled homemade, not like typical office food. My stomach growled, which was embarrassing even though nobody was around to hear it. I hadn't eaten before my shift, so the smell was particularly appealing. but I didn't go near the food. I just noted it was there and moved on. The silence in the break room was different from the silence in the hallways, more complete somehow, like the room was soundproofed, though I know it isn't. When I shifted my weight, the floorboard under my foot didn't creak the way it usually does. Even my breathing seemed muffled, but I wasn't in the room long enough to really analyze the acoustics. Moving back into the main corridor, I noticed the flickering light had changed its pattern. Now it was 5 quick flashes followed by darkness. I found myself counting again without meaning to. The darkness lasted exactly long enough for me to walk from the break room to the reception desk, but I wasn't timing my movements to match the light. That would be ridiculous. The reception area looked normal. Phone on the desk, appointment book closed, pens in their holder, everything as it should be. Except the appointment book was open when I first approached, and I distinctly remember seeing my name written in today's slot. But when I looked again, the book was closed and I didn't open it to check. Must have been a reflection or shadow that looked like writing. I completed my circuit of the ground floor without incident. Every door was locked, every window secure, every room empty, just like every other night. When I returned to the security desk to log my findings, I noticed the logbook was already filled out in my handwriting. My signature at the bottom, noting that all areas were clear and secure, but I hadn't written anything yet. I must have filled it out before starting my rounds and forgotten. That happens sometimes when you're following routine. Your muscle memory takes over and you do things automatically. Though I could have sworn the pen was in a different position than where I'd left it, and the ink looked fresher than it should have, given that I'd apparently written the entry hours earlier. The rest of my shift passed quietly. I stayed at the security desk, monitoring the cameras and reading. The screens showed empty hallways and vacant rooms exactly as expected, though occasionally I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Just shadows shifting as the cameras automatically adjusted their angles, nothing more than that. When my replacement arrived in the morning, everything was exactly as it should be. I gave him the standard briefing, noting that it had been a quiet night with no incidents to report. He seemed satisfied with my report and settled in for his shift. I gathered my things and prepared to leave, following my usual routine. I walked to my car without looking back at the building. I never looked back. It's unprofessional to seem reluctant to leave your post. But as I reached my car, I could feel something watching me from one of the upper floor windows. When I glanced up, there was nothing there, just empty windows reflecting the morning sky. The drive home was uneventful. Traffic was light, weather was clear, radio played the usual morning programming. I felt tired, which was normal after a night shift. My mind was already shifting toward thoughts of breakfast and sleep. Just another completed shift in a long series of identical shifts. At home, I followed my standard post-work routine. Shower, light meal, then bed. I fell asleep easily, which doesn't always happen after night shifts. Sometimes the transition from darkness to daylight makes it hard to wind down. But that morning I was asleep within minutes of lying down. My dreams were unremarkable. At least I don't remember them being remarkable. Just the usual nonsense that minds create during sleep. Though I did wake up several times with the feeling that someone was calling my name. But the house was quiet, and I live alone, so it was obviously just dream residue bleeding into wakefulness. When I woke up for good late in the afternoon, I felt rested and normal, ready for another shift. I prepared for work the same way I always do, gathering my equipment and reviewing my mental checklist, everything exactly as it should be. I arrived at work early as usual and received the briefing from the day shift supervisor. Standard information about building status, any maintenance issues, expected deliveries, nothing out of the ordinary. He mentioned that the emergency exit had been found propped open that morning, but maintenance had already addressed it, just a minor irregularity. As I settled in for another night shift, I reviewed the previous night's log entries. My handwriting, my signature, my report of a quiet evening with no incidents. Everything properly documented and filed. Just another successful shift in my employment record. The building feels the same as always tonight. Quiet, secure, familiar. The lights are working normally, the temperature is consistent, and all systems are functioning as expected. I'm prepared for another routine evening of standard security procedures. Though I have noticed that the emergency exit is propped open again. Story 6. The curtain fell back into place as I released it. My fingers tingled from the delicate brush of fabric against skin, a sensation that lingered like a question unanswered. The air was dense with the scent of old wood, grounding yet unsettling. For a moment my breath paused, aware of something that seemed to tense the room beyond its physical confines. My gaze shifted, expecting the ordinary, but the shadows lay strangely still, as if caught in a silent pact. Something essential had shifted, and the room felt like it was holding its breath. I'm trying to piece this together. The memory comes in fragments, like broken glass reflecting different moments that don't quite fit. I know I was there in that room, but everything after feels like watching someone else's life through thick water. The curtain, I keep coming back to the curtain. Heavy fabric, burgundy maybe, or was it brown? The color shifts when I try to focus on it, but the texture remains constant in my mind, rough against my palm, warmer than it should have been, as if something had been breathing on it from the other side. There was a sound, not immediately, but building, a low hum that seemed to come from inside my own skull at first. I remember pressing my fingers to my temples, thinking it would stop, but the vibration only grew stronger. It wasn't mechanical, not like a machine or electrical wire, more organic, like something alive was generating that frequency. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, but I wasn't moving. I'm certain of that detail. I stood perfectly still after letting go of the curtain, yet the wood groaned and settled as if bearing invisible weight. The sound came from different parts of the room near the window, by the door, sometimes right beside me. I should explain why I was there, but that part stays cloudy. I have flashes of walking down a hallway, my hand trailing along wallpaper that felt damp under my fingertips. The pattern was geometric, repetitive, hypnotic if you stared too long. I remember thinking I should look away but couldn't quite manage it. The shapes seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, matching something I could feel in my chest. The smell of old wood wasn't the only scent. There was something metallic underneath, sharp and clean like coins held too long in a sweaty palm. And something else, ozone maybe, the way the air smells before lightning strikes. But there was no storm that day. Was there even a day? The light in the room never seemed to come from any particular source. My breathing had become shallow without me noticing. Each inhale felt insufficient, as if the air had grown thicker, more resistant. I tried to take a deep breath and felt my lungs working against some invisible pressure. The sensation made me dizzy, or maybe I was already dizzy and just becoming aware of it. The hum grew louder, I'm sure of that now. It started to separate into different tones, creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible from a single source. Some frequencies I could hear normally, others I felt in my bones, in the soft tissues behind my eyes. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere, like standing inside a bell while it rings. I wanted to leave. That memory is crystal clear, the sudden, overwhelming need to get out of that room. But when I turned toward where the door should have been, I couldn't find it. Not that it had disappeared exactly. More like my eyes kept sliding away from it, unable to focus on that particular section of wall. Every time I tried to look directly at the exit, my gaze would drift to something else, a water stain on the ceiling, a scratch in the wooden floor, the way dust motes hung motionless in the strange light. The curtain moved again. I hadn't touched it this time, but the fabric swayed gently, as if stirred by a breeze that didn't exist anywhere else in the room. Behind it, I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach clench. Not a window, not a wall, something that reflected light in a way that hurt to perceive directly. My hands were shaking. I remember looking down at them, surprised by the tremor I couldn't control. The skin looked pale, almost translucent, and I could see the blue-green network of veins beneath. For a moment, they didn't feel like my hands at all. Too thin, too delicate, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. The geometric wallpaper pattern was moving. I'm certain this happened, even though it sounds impossible when I try to explain it. The shapes weren't just pulsing anymore, they were rotating, sliding into new configurations, creating designs that my mind couldn't quite process. Watching them made me nauseous, but I couldn't look away. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape. I heard my own voice, though I don't remember speaking. A whisper, barely audible above the humming, saying words I can't quite recall. Something about the light behind the curtain, about the way the room felt larger on the inside than the outside. The voice sounded young, uncertain, like a child asking questions they don't really want answered. The floor beneath my feet began to vibrate in rhythm with the humming. The sensation traveled up through my legs into my spine, until my entire skeleton felt like a tuning fork struck by an invisible hand. I pressed my palms against the wall for balance, and the wallpaper felt warm and slightly sticky under my touch. There was a figure in the corner. I'm not sure when it appeared, or if it had been there all along and I was only just noticing. Motionless, indistinct, like a shadow cast by nothing. When I tried to focus on it, the edges blurred and shifted. It might have been a coat hanging on a hook, or a trick of the light, or something else entirely. But it felt aware, attentive, as if it were watching me try to understand what was happening. The metallic smell grew stronger, almost overwhelming now. It reminded me of blood, but cleaner somehow, more refined, like the scent of new pennies mixed with the ozone smell before a storm. My mouth began to taste of copper, and I realized I had bitten my tongue without noticing. Time felt wrong in that room. I might have been standing there for minutes or hours. The quality of light never changed, and the humming provided no sense of progression or rhythm I could use to measure duration. Sometimes I felt like I had just arrived, other times like I had been there forever. Both sensations seemed equally true. The curtain parted slightly on its own, revealing more of whatever lay behind it. The light that leaked through wasn't white or yellow or any color I could name. It seemed to exist in a spectrum my eyes weren't designed to process, creating afterimages that lingered even when I closed my lids. Looking at it directly made my head throb in time with my pulse. I tried to remember how I had gotten into the room, but that memory remained stubbornly blank. There must have been a door, a hallway, a series of choices that led me there. But when I reached back in my mind, I found only the sensation of movement, of being drawn forward by something I couldn't resist or understand. The figure in the corner shifted slightly, or maybe my perception of it changed. For just a moment I thought I saw a face pale, expressionless, with eyes that reflected the impossible light from behind the curtain. But when I blinked, it was just shadows again, just the suggestion of presence without form. My breathing had become synchronized with the humming without me realizing it. Each inhale matched the rise in frequency, each exhale followed the fall. The rhythm felt natural, necessary, as if my body was adapting to some new atmospheric pressure. But part of my mind recoiled from this synchronization, recognizing it as wrong, somehow dangerous. The wallpaper patterns had formed something recognizable, now symbols or letters in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. They spelled out concepts rather than words, ideas that bypassed language entirely and lodged themselves directly in my consciousness. The meaning felt important, urgent, but slipped away whenever I tried to grasp it fully. I reached toward the curtain again, though I don't remember deciding to do so. My hand moved of its own accord, fingers extended toward the fabric that still held traces of impossible warmth. The closer I got, the stronger the humming became, until it filled not just my ears but my entire being. I was the sound, or the sound was me. The distinction no longer seemed relevant. The moment my fingertips brushed the curtain for the second time, everything stopped. The humming cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt solid, oppressive. The wallpaper patterns froze mid-rotation. Even the dust motes in the air seemed suspended, caught between one moment and the next. In that silence, I heard something else, a voice speaking words I recognized as my own, though I couldn't remember saying them. It was explaining something about the nature of the room, about what lay behind the curtain, about why I had been brought there. But even as I heard the words, they faded from my memory, leaving only the impression of significance without substance. The silence shattered like glass, and suddenly I was somewhere else or someone else. The room remained the same, but my position had shifted. I stood closer to the corner where the figure waited, though I had no memory of moving. The perspective made everything look different. The proportions were wrong. The angles didn't match what I remembered from moments before. The figure turned toward me, and for an instant I saw myself reflected in what might have been its eyes. But the reflection showed me as I had never been, younger, older, changed in ways I couldn't articulate. The image lasted only a heartbeat before dissolving back into shadow and suggestion. I understand now that I'm trying to reconstruct something that may not be meant for reconstruction. These fragments don't fit together properly because they were never meant to be whole. Each piece exists in its own space, its own logic, connected to the others by threads I can't see but somehow feel. The humming has returned, but softer now, more distant. It follows me even here, even now, as I try to make sense of what happened in that room. Sometimes I catch myself breathing in rhythm with it again, and I have to consciously break the pattern before it takes hold completely. I know there was more, there had to be more. The curtain parted fully at some point, revealing what lay beyond, but that memory remains locked away, protected by some mechanism in my mind that refuses to let me access it directly. I catch glimpses, sometimes flashes, of that impossible light, the sensation of vast space where none should exist, the feeling of being observed by something vast and patient. The room is still there, I'm certain of this, though I can't explain how I know. It waits behind the curtain of my memory, unchanged and unchanging. Sometimes I feel drawn back to it, pulled by the same force that brought me there initially. The sensation is strongest in moments of quiet, when my guard is down and my mind begins to drift. The figure in the corner was trying to tell me something. I realize that now, though I misunderstood at the time. Its presence wasn't threatening, it was warning me, or preparing me, or showing me something I needed to see. But I was too frightened, too overwhelmed by the strangeness of everything else to listen properly. These fragments are all I have left of whatever happened in that room. They surface at random moments, triggered by familiar scents or sounds or the particular quality of light filtering through fabric. Each time they appear, they seem slightly different, as if the memory itself is evolving, growing, changing into something new. I've stopped trying to force the pieces together. Instead, I let them exist as they are broken, incomplete, beautiful in their fragmentation. Perhaps this is how they were meant to be experienced, not as a linear narrative, but as a collection of moments that exist simultaneously, layered like translucent sheets of colored glass. The humming grows stronger each day. What started as a barely perceptible vibration has become a constant presence, a frequency that seems to emanate from somewhere deep inside my skull. I've learned to live with it, to let it become part of the background noise of existence. But sometimes, in moments of perfect quiet, it swells and grows until it drowns out everything else. I think the room is calling me back. The sensation has been building for days now, a pull I can feel in my bones, in the spaces between my thoughts. Part of me wants to resist, to stay here in the safety of incomplete memory and fragmented understanding. But another part recognizes that return as inevitable, necessary, the completion of something that was only begun behind that burgundy curtain. The figure in the corner was me. I understand that now, though the knowledge brings no comfort, no sense of resolution. It was me as I will be, or as I was, or as I am in some other configuration of reality where the rules work differently. It was trying to show me what I would become, what I am becoming, what I have always been beneath the surface of ordinary perception. The wallpaper patterns have begun appearing in other places, in the grain of wood, in the arrangement of shadows on walls, in the random distribution of stars visible through windows. The same geometric designs, the same hypnotic rotations, spelling out the same urgent messages in a language I almost but never quite understand. I can feel the curtain between my fingers even now, hours or days or weeks later. The sensation has become permanent, a phantom touch that reminds me constantly of that moment when everything changed. Sometimes I catch myself reaching toward curtains that aren't there, trying to part fabric that exists only in memory. The humming has found harmony with itself, creating those same impossible chords I heard in the room. Multiple frequencies layered and interweaving, building structures of sound that shouldn't be able to exist in normal space. I've become an instrument played by invisible hands, resonating with frequencies that originate somewhere beyond the edges of what I thought was real. Something is waking up. I can feel it stirring in the spaces between my memories, in the gaps where coherent narrative breaks down into pure sensation and meaning. It's been sleeping, waiting, growing stronger while I struggled to understand what happened in that room. But now it's ready to emerge, to show me what I saw behind the curtain, to complete the transformation that began when my fingers first touched that impossible fabric. The memories are becoming more vivid, more insistent. They push against the barriers my mind erected to protect itself, demanding recognition, integration, acceptance. I know that soon I won't be able to hold them back anymore. They'll flood through me like water through a broken dam, carrying with them the full weight of whatever truth I glimpsed in that room. I should be afraid, but I'm not. Fear belongs to the person I was before I touched the curtain, before I heard the humming, before I saw my own reflection in the eyes of shadows. What I feel now is closer to anticipation, the electric tension that comes just before understanding arrives. The room is calling, the curtain is parting. The humming has become a song, and I remember now that I know all the words. Story 7. The air pressed gently against my skin, yet I felt no breeze. A luminescent mist floated around, casting shadows without form, glimmering like echoes in a forgotten language. My limbs tingled, responding to commands that were not entirely my own. The surface beneath me pulsed softly, synchronizing with a rhythm that hummed through my veins. Silence wrapped around me, dense and expectant, as I struggled to grasp the boundary between my thoughts and an alien awareness. There was a presence, a quiet, watching thing hidden just beyond my vision. I wake from this dream, if that's what it was, with the taste of copper in my mouth and a headache that feels like static electricity behind my eyes. The same dream or memory or whatever it is has been coming back for weeks now. Each time it feels more real, more like something that actually happened rather than something my mind conjured up. There are gaps in my memory, large, uncomfortable gaps that I can't seem to fill no matter how hard I try. I know something happened to me, something significant enough to leave these strange impressions burned into my subconscious, but the details slip away like water through my fingers every time I try to grasp them. I've been different since then, not in any way that others would notice, but I feel it in my bones, in the way my reflection sometimes seems to take a split second too long to mirror my movements, in the way certain frequencies of sound make my skin crawl with recognition I can't place. The apartment feels smaller than it used to. The walls seem to press inward during the quiet hours, and I find myself checking the locks on my door multiple times before bed, though I can't remember what I'm afraid of finding on the other side. I decided to start recording myself while I sleep. Maybe I talk in my sleep now. Maybe I move in ways that might give me clues about what happened. The first few recordings were nothing but the usual sounds of sleep breathing, the occasional shift of bed sheets, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But last night's recording was different. I'm listening to it now, wearing headphones in my living room with the curtains drawn. For the first 3 hours, it's the same as always. Then, around what must have been deep sleep, my breathing changes. It becomes shallower, more measured, almost like I'm trying not to be heard by something. Then there's a sound I don't recognize. It's not coming from me. I can still hear my careful breathing underneath it. The sound is electronic, but organic somehow, like a machine trying to mimic something alive. It shifts in frequency, rising and falling in patterns that seem almost conversational, as if it's responding to something I can't hear on the recording. My recorded voice whispers something, but the words are muffled, unclear. I turn the volume up, but that only makes the electronic sound louder, more intrusive. There's a quality to it that makes my teeth ache, like fingernails on a chalkboard, but somehow worse, more personal. The recording ends abruptly after that. Not a gradual fade or the natural end of the file, it just stops, as if someone hit a switch. I checked the device. It should have recorded for 8 hours, but there are only 4 hours of audio. The missing time sits in my stomach like a stone. Looking at the recording device now, I notice something I hadn't seen before. There are small scratches on the plastic casing, thin parallel lines that look almost deliberate. I run my finger over them and feel a strange vibration, so faint I might be imagining it, but it's there, a subtle pulse that seems to respond to my touch. The scratches remind me of something, but I can't place what. The memory hovers just out of reach, like trying to remember a word that's on the tip of your tongue. I close my eyes and try to let the memory surface naturally. Sometimes forcing it just pushes it deeper. There's a flash of something, lights that don't behave like lights should, moving in ways that make my eyes water to remember. They weren't harsh or bright, but they had a quality that made them impossible to look at directly, like trying to focus on your own blind spot. The lights were accompanied by voices, but not human voices. They had the rhythm and cadence of speech, but the sounds themselves were all wrong, like hearing a conversation through water or from inside a dream. I was lying down during this memory, I think. The surface beneath me was neither warm nor cold, but it had that same subtle pulse I felt when touching the scratches on the recording device. It was almost comfortable, if comfort is the right word for something so fundamentally alien. There was someone else there, or something else. I couldn't see them clearly. They existed more as a sense of presence than as a visual thing. But I knew they were watching me, studying me with an attention so intense it felt physical, like being touched by invisible hands. The memory fades before I can grasp more of it, leaving me with that familiar frustration of almost remembering. I decide to walk around my apartment looking for other clues I might have missed. In the kitchen, I find a notebook I don't remember keeping. The handwriting is mine, but the words feel foreign, like I wrote them in a language I've since forgotten how to speak. The first entry is simple. The air tastes different now, metallic, like breathing through a screen. The second checked all the windows twice. They're locked, but something got in anyway, left no trace except the smell new plastic and cold blood. I don't remember writing these words, but reading them brings back sensations. The metallic taste in my mouth, the way the air in my apartment sometimes feels too thin, too processed. The smell mentioned in the second entry hits me now, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere I can't identify. Further down the page, the mirror in the bathroom shows things a second before they happen. Blinked and saw myself blinking, raised my hand and saw the motion already completed in the reflection. I look up from the notebook toward the hallway that leads to the bathroom. The mirror there has always been slightly warped, a cheap thing that came with the apartment, but now I'm afraid to look into it, afraid of what I might see looking back. The final entry in the notebook is longer. They're still here, not in the room, but close enough. I can feel them watching through something that isn't quite sight. The recording device picked up their presence, but not in the way I expected. The sound isn't them, it's the space around them being disturbed, like ripples in water, but made of frequency instead of liquid. My hands are shaking as I read this. I don't remember writing it, but I know it's true. The electronic sound on the recording wasn't a voice or a machine, it was the audio equivalent of a shadow, the negative space where something existed that shouldn't have been there. I look around my living room with new eyes. The shadows in the corners seem deeper than they should be, more substantial. The afternoon light coming through the curtains creates patterns on the wall that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. There's a photograph on my bookshelf that I don't remember taking. It shows my apartment from an angle that should be impossible, too high to be taken from floor level, but too low to be taken from the ceiling. In the photo, I'm sleeping on my couch, but there's something wrong with the image. There are too many shadows, not just the normal shadows cast by furniture and objects, but additional dark shapes that don't correspond to anything visible. They cluster around my sleeping form like they're drawn to it, and looking at them makes my vision blur in that same uncomfortable way I remember from the moving lights. The photograph itself feels wrong in my hands. The paper is too smooth, too uniform, like it was printed on something that only resembles photographic paper. When I hold it up to the light, I can see there are layers to it, images beneath the surface image that shift and move when viewed from different angles. I set the photograph down quickly, but not before catching a glimpse of what lies beneath the surface layer. It's the same scene, but from a different angle, showing things that weren't visible in the top image, showing the sources of those impossible shadows. The room feels colder now, though the temperature hasn't changed. It's a different kind of cold, one that comes from inside and spreads outward. I recognize this sensation from somewhere, but the memory is locked behind the same barrier that holds back everything else. I decide to try something different. Instead of forcing the memories to surface, I'll let my body remember for me. I lie down on the couch in the same position as in the photograph and close my eyes. The change is immediate. The sounds of the apartment, the hum of appliances, the distant traffic, the settling of the building all fade into something that isn't quite silence but isn't quite sound either. It's like being underwater, but instead of water, I'm submerged in a medium that conducts sensation differently. My skin begins to tingle, the same sensation from the dream memory. It starts at my fingertips and spreads inward, a gentle electric feeling that's not entirely unpleasant. But underneath the tingling is something else, a sense of being observed so intense it's almost physical pressure. I keep my eyes closed, but I can feel the light in the room changing. It's getting brighter and dimmer in patterns, like something is moving between me and the light source. The patterns have a rhythm to them, almost like a pulse or heartbeat, but not quite regular enough to be either. There's a sound now, so low I feel it more than hear it. It's coming from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration that seems to originate inside my own bones. As it grows stronger, I start to understand that it's not really a sound at all, it's some other form of communication that my brain is trying to process as audio. The tingling in my skin intensifies, and now I can feel something else. Invisible pressure points touching me at specific locations, my forehead, the palms of my hands, the base of my throat. The touch is gentle but purposeful, like someone taking measurements. I want to open my eyes, but something tells me that would break whatever is happening, and I need to remember. I need to know what happened to me. The pressure points begin to pulse in sequence, and with each pulse, a fragment of memory surfaces. I see myself in a place that isn't quite a room and isn't quite outdoors. The walls, if they are walls, seem to breathe slightly, expanding and contracting with that same rhythm I feel pulsing through the surface beneath me. There are others there, but they exist at the edge of perception. I can't look at them directly, my eyes slide away whenever I try to focus on them, like they're made of some material that refuses to be seen. But I know they're there, know they're the source of the watching presence I feel. One of them approaches me, and I feel rather than see it lean over me. Its attention is like a physical weight, pressing down on my consciousness with an intensity that's both terrifying and strangely comforting. I have the sense that it's trying to communicate something important, but the message is in a language my mind can't quite process. The memory becomes more vivid. I can smell that strange scent, new plastic and cold blood, more strongly now. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it's so alien that it makes my stomach turn with recognition of something fundamentally other. The being above me makes a sound that might be speech, but it bypasses my ears entirely and resonates directly in my chest cavity. The vibration forms patterns that almost make sense, like hearing a familiar song played on an instrument that doesn't exist. Then something is placed on my forehead. It's small and warm and seems to sink slightly into my skin. The moment it makes contact, my perception changes dramatically. The space around me becomes clearer, more defined, but also more impossible. I can see in directions that don't have names, perceive dimensions that my mind has no framework for understanding. Through this enhanced perception, I finally see them clearly. They're not quite physical in the way I understand physicality, but they're not incorporeal either. They exist in the spaces between states of matter, in the gaps between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats. And they're beautiful in a way that makes me want to weep. Not beautiful like anything I've ever seen, but beautiful like a concept I've never had words for. Looking at them feels like remembering something I lost before I was born. The one closest to me extends something that might be a hand, and I reach up to touch it. The contact sends shockwaves through my entire being, not painful but overwhelming. Information floods through me, not words or images, but pure understanding that my mind struggles to contain. I learn that they've been watching for a long time, not just me but all of us, waiting for the right moment to make contact. I learn that the barriers between their existence and ours are thinning, and that some of us are changing in response, becoming bridges between worlds. I learn that I'm one of those bridges now, and that's why I can't remember clearly. The human mind isn't designed to hold these experiences intact. The memories have to be fragmented, scattered, or they would burn through my consciousness like acid through paper. But even as I understand this, I can feel the knowledge slipping away. The device on my forehead grows warm, then hot, then disappears entirely, taking most of the memory with it. I'm left with only fragments, scattered pieces that don't quite fit together. I open my eyes in my living room, gasping like I've been underwater. The afternoon light seems harsh and artificial compared to the impossible illumination of the memory. My skin still tingles, but faintly now, like the echo of an echo. I sit up and immediately notice something new. There's an object on my coffee table that wasn't there before, a small, smooth thing that seems to shift between different materials as I look at it. Sometimes it appears to be metal, sometimes stone, sometimes something that has no name in any language I know. When I pick it up, it's warm and vibrates with that same subtle pulse I felt in the recording device scratches. But this vibration is stronger, more complex, like it's trying to communicate something urgent. As I hold it, more fragments surface. I remember the moment of leaving, not walking away, but being gently returned, like waking from a deep sleep. I remember the sense of loss as the connection was severed, the feeling of being suddenly alone in my own mind after sharing it with something vast and patient and kind. I remember them telling me without words that this wouldn't be the last time, that the changes in me are permanent now, and that I'll be called back when the barrier's thin enough. I remember understanding that others like me exist, scattered across the world, all carrying fragments of impossible memories and small, warm objects that pulse with alien rhythms. The object in my hand grows warmer, and I realize it's responding to something. I look around the room and notice that the shadows have changed again. They're deeper now, more purposeful, and they're moving in patterns that mirror the pulsing of the object. The air tastes metallic again, and I can smell new plastic and cold blood growing stronger. The walls of my apartment seem to breathe slightly, and the light coming through the curtains takes on that impossible quality that makes my eyes water to perceive. They're coming back, or maybe they never left. Maybe the separation between their world and mine is thinner than I thought, and the object in my hand is some kind of beacon, calling them back to complete whatever they started. I should be afraid, but I'm not. The fear I felt before was the fear of the unknown, but now I know them, even if I can't remember clearly. They're not malevolent, just incomprehensibly other, and I'm changing into something that can bridge that gap between other and familiar. The object pulses faster now, and I can feel answering pulses from somewhere beyond the walls of my apartment. They're close, getting closer, and soon the barriers will thin enough for them to step through completely. I close my eyes and wait, holding the warm, impossible object against my chest. The tingling in my skin spreads outward from the point of contact, and I can feel my consciousness beginning to expand again, reaching toward something vast and patient and utterly alien. The last thing I remember thinking before the change takes hold completely is a question that might not have an answer. How many times have I forgotten this before? How many times have I sat in this room, holding this object, waiting for them to return and take me back to that place that isn't quite a place? The shadows deepen, the air grows thick with possibility, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear that electronic sound again, not a voice, but the space around presence being disturbed, growing closer with each pulse of the object in my hands. Am I remembering, or am I living this for the first time? And does it matter when the ending is always the same me, waiting in the growing dark for something beautiful and impossible to come and take me home? Story 8. The carpet felt different beneath my feet, softer, as if it remembered a path I hadn't walked before. Each step echoed in the hallway, a sound that didn't quite match the pressure I applied. I always closed the curtains precisely at dusk, yet today they swayed slightly, resisting an invisible breeze. The rhythm of the kettle's whistle in the kitchen was off-kilter, slower, yet more insistent, drawing attention away from the forgotten keys on the counter. I blinked, paused, certain I had left them in my pocket last night. They shouldn't have been there, but they were. That memory comes to me now, clear as glass, though it took me years to understand what it meant. I've never told anyone about what happened after that moment. Not the doctors, not the few friends I still keep in touch with, not even myself in those quiet hours when sleep won't come. But I think it's time. My hands shake as I speak these words, and I can feel that familiar pressure building in my chest, the one that always comes when I get too close to remembering. I was house-sitting for someone back then, a colleague who needed someone reliable to watch their place while they traveled overseas for work. It seemed like a blessing at the time. I'd been going through a rough patch, needed space to think, to breathe. The house was perfect for that, secluded, quiet, surrounded by enough trees that you couldn't see the neighbors. Just me, a stack of books I'd been meaning to read, and all the solitude I thought I craved. The first week passed without incident. I fell into a comfortable routine. Morning coffee by the large window in the living room, afternoons reading in the study, evenings preparing simple meals in the well-appointed kitchen. The house felt welcoming, lived in but not cluttered. Everything had its place, and I respected that order. I watered the plants, collected the mail, kept everything exactly as I'd found it. It was during the second week that I first noticed something wasn't quite right. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and say definitively that this was wrong. Just small things that didn't align with my memory of how I'd left them. The coffee mug I was certain I'd placed in the dishwasher would be sitting clean and dry in the cabinet. Books I remembered closing would be found open to different pages. The thermostat would be set to temperatures I never would have chosen. At first, I blamed my own distraction. I'd been under stress before coming to the house, my mind scattered, my attention fractured by the problems I was trying to escape. It made sense that I might be forgetting small actions, misremembering where I'd left things. I told myself this was normal, that the unfamiliar environment was simply playing tricks on my perception. But then there were the sounds. It started as a low hum, so quiet I thought it might be the refrigerator or some other appliance cycling on and off. The frequency was just at the edge of hearing, the kind of sound that makes you turn your head to locate its source, only to have it seem to shift position when you do. I found myself walking through the house at odd hours, pressing my ear to walls, checking every electronic device, trying to identify what was generating that persistent drone. The hum would come and go without pattern. Sometimes it would pulse through the walls for hours, a steady vibration that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the house itself. Other times, days would pass in complete silence, and I'd begin to think I'd imagined it entirely. but then it would return, often in the middle of the night, pulling me from sleep with its insistent presence. I began to notice other things too. The mirrors in the house seemed to catch reflections that didn't quite match my movements. I turned my head to the left, and my reflection would lag just a fraction of a second behind, as if it were copying rather than mirroring. The bathroom mirror was the worst. I'd brush my teeth and catch glimpses of movement that didn't correspond to anything I was doing, subtle shifts in the reflected image that made my skin crawl. The smell came next, sweet and metallic like copper pennies dissolved in honey. It would appear suddenly, filling a room with its cloying presence, then vanish just as quickly. I searched everywhere for the source, checked for gas leaks, examined the plumbing, looked for dead animals that might have gotten trapped in the walls. Nothing. The smell had no origin I could identify, no logical explanation for its presence or its disappearance. I started keeping a journal, documenting these incidents, trying to find patterns or connections. Reading back through my entries now, I can see how my handwriting changed over those weeks. The early entries are neat, controlled, rational. But as the pages progress, the letters become more erratic, the words press deeper into the paper, as if I were trying to carve the truth into something permanent. The lights began to malfunction during the third week. Not the dramatic flickering you see in movies, but something more subtle and therefore more unsettling. They would brighten and dim in slow waves, as if controlled by some unseen hand adjusting a dimmer switch. The pattern was almost hypnotic, a gradual increase in intensity followed by a slow fade, then back again. I'd sit in the living room and watch the overhead fixture pulse with this strange rhythm, feeling my heartbeat try to synchronize with its cadence. I called an electrician, but when he arrived, the lights behaved perfectly. Every switch worked as intended, every bulb shone with steady illumination. He checked the wiring, tested the circuits, found nothing amiss. After he left, the pulsing resumed within hours, as if whatever was causing it had simply waited for him to go. The pressure in my chest became constant around this time. Not painful exactly, but a persistent sensation of weight, as if something were pressing down on my ribs from the inside. It was strongest near electronic devices, the television, the computer, even my phone. I'd approach these objects and feel the pressure intensify, accompanied by a prickling sensation across my skin that raised goosebumps despite the warmth of the house. Sleep became elusive, not because of noise or discomfort, but because of an overwhelming feeling of being observed. I'd lie in bed with my eyes closed, trying to drift off, only to be seized by the absolute certainty that something was watching me. The sensation was so strong it was almost physical, like invisible eyes boring into me from every angle. I'd open my eyes and scan the room, finding nothing but shadows and familiar furniture, yet the feeling would persist until exhaustion finally claimed me in the early hours of morning. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I experienced what I can only describe as the key moment, the incident that shattered any remaining doubt about what was happening in that house. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Clear, deliberate steps, the sound of someone walking with purpose. But I was alone in the house. I knew I was alone. The footsteps paused outside my door. I held my breath, straining to listen, my heart hammering so hard I was sure it would give me away. The doorknob turned slowly, silently, and the door began to open. I watched in frozen terror as the gap widened, expecting to see an intruder, a burglar, anyone who might explain this violation of my solitude. But there was no one there. The door stood open, revealing only the dark hallway beyond. Yet the footsteps resumed, entering my room, moving across the floor with the same measured pace. I could hear them clearly, could almost feel the vibrations through the floorboards, but I could see nothing that might be causing them. The sounds circled my bed once, twice, then stopped at the foot of it. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed by fear and confusion, waiting for something else to happen. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, the door closed on its own, and I was left alone with the thundering of my pulse and the absolute knowledge that I was sharing that house with something I couldn't see or understand. I should have left then. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to pack my things and go, to abandon my commitment to house-sitting and flee to somewhere safe and familiar. But I found myself unable to act on this impulse. It wasn't just fear that kept me there, though fear was certainly part of it. There was something else, a strange compulsion that made leaving feel impossible, as if invisible chains were holding me to that place. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of escalating strangeness. The hum in the walls grew louder, more insistent, sometimes rising to a pitch that made my teeth ache. The mirrors began to show reflections that bore no resemblance to reality-empty rooms when I stood directly in front of them, or images of myself in positions I wasn't actually occupying. The sweet metallic smell became overwhelming at times, so strong it made me nauseous and dizzy. My journal entries from this period are barely legible, filled with frantic observations and desperate attempts to make sense of what was happening. I wrote about seeing movements in my peripheral vision, about electronics turning themselves on and off, about the growing certainty that the house itself was somehow alive and aware of my presence. Reading those pages now, I can see my sanity fraying in real time, each entry more disjointed than the last. The end came suddenly, though I'm still not entirely sure what form it took. I remember being in the kitchen, trying to prepare what would be my final meal in that house, when every electronic device began to activate simultaneously. The television blared static, the radio cycled through stations at impossible speed, the microwave ran empty while the coffee maker gurgled and hissed. The lights strobed in that same slow rhythm, but faster now, more urgent, and the hum in the walls rose to a deafening crescendo. I ran then, finally finding the strength to break whatever hold that place had on me. I grabbed my keys and fled, leaving everything else behind: my clothes, my books, my journal with all its desperate scribblings. I drove until my hands stopped shaking, until the pressure in my chest began to ease, until I could no longer feel those invisible eyes watching my every move. That was years ago now. I live in a different place, far from that house and the things that happened there. I've built a new life, found work that keeps me busy, surrounded myself with the noise and activity of urban living. Most days, I can almost convince myself that what I experienced was some kind of breakdown, a stress-induced episode that my mind has distorted and amplified in memory. But the effects linger. I still feel that chest pressure around electronic devices, still catch movements in mirrors that don't match my actions, still wake sometimes in the night with the absolute certainty that I'm being watched. The sweet metallic smell returns occasionally, usually when I'm alone and vulnerable, reminding me that some experiences leave marks that never fully heal. I've tried to research what might have happened in that house, but I've found no answers that satisfy me. No history of tragedy or trauma, no reports of similar experiences from other visitors or residents. Whatever was there seems to have been mine alone to encounter, a private horror that defies explanation or understanding. The worst part is the lingering doubt about whether I truly escaped at all. Sometimes, in quiet moments when my guard is down, I feel that familiar presence returning, that sense of being observed and evaluated by something beyond my comprehension. I tell myself it's just trauma, just my mind playing tricks born from that terrible experience. But late at night, when the city sleeps and I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder if whatever was in that house followed me when I left. I can feel it even now as I speak these words, that old familiar pressure building in my chest, the prickle of invisible eyes upon me. The hum is starting again just at the edge of hearing, and I know that no matter how far I run or how much time passes, some part of me will always remain in that house, trapped in those moments when I first realized I was never truly alone. The carpet beneath my feet feels different now, softer somehow, as if it remembers paths I've never walked, and I'm beginning to understand that telling this story may have been the very thing it was waiting for me to do. Story 9. Dust had settled on the windowsill, a fine layer that clung to my fingertips as I brushed against it. The air was thick, carrying the peculiar weight of something unspoken. My skin tingled as a draft swept through, colder than it should be, making the hairs on my arms stand alert. In the silence, my breath felt louder, each inhale mingling with an unshed tension. I turned slowly, expecting to see everything as I left it, but the room seemed smaller, its angles sharper. The floor creaked underfoot, a whisper of warning. Nothing had moved, yet everything felt misplaced. I need to be clear about this from the start. Nothing happened that night. I keep telling myself that because it's true. People get confused sometimes, especially when they're tired, and I was definitely tired. The mind plays tricks when you're exhausted, creates patterns where none exist, fills in gaps with nonsense. That's all this was, nonsense. I wasn't even supposed to be there. The house belonged to my cousin, and I was just checking on it while she was away. Simple task, really. Walk through, make sure everything looked normal, lock up and leave. Basic house-sitting duties, nothing more complicated than that. It was just my imagination when I noticed the front door was already unlocked. I must have forgotten to turn the key properly the last time I visited. These old locks stick sometimes, give you the impression they've caught when they haven't. Perfectly reasonable explanation. The door swung open with that particular weight old doors have, solid wood that seems to move slower than it should. The hallway looked exactly as I remembered it. Same faded wallpaper with its pattern of small roses, same narrow runner carpet that had seen better decades. The air inside felt different though, but that's normal in houses that have been closed up. Stale air gets trapped, circulation stops, creates that peculiar stillness. Nothing unusual about that at all. I didn't see anything in the living room. The furniture sat in its usual arrangement, the couch facing the television, the coffee table with its collection of magazines nobody ever read, everything perfectly ordinary. The fact that the magazines looked like they'd been moved meant nothing. Air currents can shift lightweight objects, or maybe I'd bumped the table during my previous visit and forgotten. The kitchen was equally unremarkable. Clean counters, empty sink, refrigerator humming its normal mechanical song. I wasn't there long enough to notice details, but somehow I remember the way the light fell across the linoleum, creating these geometric patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Not that I was paying attention to such things. I was just doing my job, checking rooms, being responsible. It was probably just the plumbing when I heard that sound from upstairs. Old houses make noise constantly. Pipes expanding and contracting, wood settling, normal structural sounds that can seem strange when you're alone. The sound wasn't like footsteps at all, despite what my mind tried to suggest. Just random creaking, the kind every old building produces. I didn't want to go upstairs, not because anything was wrong, but because it seemed unnecessary. I could see from the bottom of the stairs that everything looked normal up there. The landing was empty, doors closed as they should be, nothing out of place. But I went anyway because that was my job, being thorough. The stairs felt solid under my feet, each step producing its expected creak. 17 steps total, though I wasn't counting. The banister was smooth under my palm, worn by decades of hands sliding along its surface. At the top, the hallway stretched in both directions, lit by that peculiar light that old houses seem to generate even when the bulbs are dim. The first bedroom was my cousin's. I barely glanced inside, just enough to confirm everything appeared normal. Her bed was made, dresser tidy, curtains drawn, nothing to see there. I certainly didn't notice the way the shadows fell across the floor in patterns that seemed too regular, too intentional. That would have been my imagination anyway. The guest room door was closed, which made sense because it usually was. I turned the handle without thinking, just routine checking. The room was empty as expected. Small bed, simple dresser, one window facing the backyard, completely unremarkable space. The fact that it felt warm despite the rest of the house being cool meant nothing. Different rooms maintained different temperatures for all sorts of reasons. I wasn't in there long enough to notice much, but I remember the ceiling had water stains in the corner, pale brown marks that formed shapes if you looked too long. Not that I was looking. I was just doing my job, being professional, getting ready to leave. The bathroom was the last room I checked. Standard fixtures, clean and ordinary. The mirror reflected exactly what it should have, nothing more, nothing less. My face looked tired, which made sense given how late it was getting. The fluorescent light above the mirror hummed with that particular frequency old fluorescents produce, steady and mechanical. It was just the lighting when my reflection seemed to lag behind my movements. Fluorescent bulbs create all sorts of optical illusions, especially when they're old. The slight delay between moving my hand and seeing it move in the mirror was just a trick of timing, nothing more significant than that. I was ready to leave after checking all the rooms. Job completed, responsibilities fulfilled. The house was secure and normal, exactly as it should be. Walking back downstairs, I felt satisfied with my thoroughness. Each step was deliberate, measured, bringing me closer to the front door and the end of this simple task. But I found myself stopping in the living room again, not because anything was different, but because I wanted to double-check my work. Being responsible means being careful, and careful people verify their observations. The room looked identical to how I'd left it minutes before. Same furniture arrangement, same magazines on the coffee table, same everything. Except the magazines were definitely in a different order now. Not that it mattered, because magazines shift on their own all the time. Air currents, vibrations from passing traffic, settling furniture, dozens of reasonable explanations for such minor changes. I wasn't concerned because there was nothing to be concerned about. The metallic scent was probably just the rain starting outside. Old houses pick up atmospheric changes quickly, and metal fixtures often carry odors when humidity shifts. Perfectly normal phenomenon. The fact that it smelled specifically like heated copper meant nothing, because I wasn't really paying attention to smells anyway. I should have left then, would have, if I hadn't noticed the basement door was slightly ajar. My cousin always kept that door closed, had mentioned it specifically during her instructions. Simple enough to fix, just pull it shut and continue with my evening. No reason to investigate further. But the air coming up from the basement felt different. Not cold exactly, but carrying something that made my skin react. Temperature changes create drafts, and drafts carry all sorts of sensations. The fact that this particular draft felt deliberate, almost like breathing, was just my tired mind creating patterns where none existed. I didn't go down there, absolutely didn't descend those stairs or explore that basement. My job was to check the main floors only, and I'd completed that task thoroughly. Whatever sounds might have been coming from below were just the normal mechanical noises old houses produce. Furnace cycling, water heater operating, foundation settling. Yet somehow I remember the basement ceiling was painted blue, a pale color that seemed to glow in the dim light, which is impossible because I never went down there, never saw that space at all. Must be confusing it with some other basement, some other house from some other time. Memory plays tricks like that, especially when you're tired. The blue paint had been applied carefully, I noticed, despite not being there. Even coverage, no brush marks, professional work. And the floor was concrete, smooth and clean, with a small drain in the center that caught what light there was and reflected it back. Details I couldn't possibly know because I never descended those stairs. The sound wasn't like breathing at all, despite what my imagination suggested. Just air moving through pipes, creating those rhythmic patterns that mechanical systems produce. Steady and measured, like lungs filling and emptying, but obviously just coincidence. Buildings breathe in their own way, expanding and contracting with temperature changes. I closed the basement door firmly and walked away. Simple action, problem solved. The latch caught properly this time, holding the door secure against its frame. No more drafts, no more sounds, no more distractions from completing my responsibilities. The front door was still open when I reached it, which made sense because I'd left it that way for ventilation. Fresh air helps clear stale atmospheres, and I'd wanted the house to feel more normal while I worked. Perfectly logical decision on my part. The fact that I couldn't remember opening it so wide was just fatigue affecting my memory. Standing in the doorway, I took one final look back. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Tidy, secure, unremarkable. My cousin would return to find her house in perfect condition, exactly as she'd left it. Job well done, responsibilities fulfilled, nothing more to consider. The street outside was quiet, normal for that neighborhood at that hour. Streetlights casting their usual pools of illumination, cars parked in their expected positions, everything ordinary and reassuring. No reason to feel like I was being observed because I wasn't. Sometimes fatigue creates the sensation of being watched when you're actually completely alone. I locked the front door carefully, testing the handle twice to ensure it caught properly. The key turned smoothly, deadbolt sliding into place with its satisfying mechanical click. House secured, task completed, evening concluded successfully. Time to go home and forget about this routine visit entirely. Walking to my car, I felt that peculiar lightness that comes after completing obligations. Relief, satisfaction, the pleasant tiredness that follows a job well done. My keys were exactly where I'd left them, in my pocket where they belonged. The car started normally, engine turning over with its familiar sound. Driving away, I watched the house shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. Just another building on just another street, nothing special or memorable about it. By morning, I'd probably forget most of the details entirely. That's how routine tasks work. They fade from memory because they're unremarkable. I didn't think about it for days afterward, didn't wonder about those sounds or that scent or the way the basement door had opened itself, because none of that happened, obviously. My mind had been tired, creating connections where none existed, building narratives from random sensory input. Perfectly normal psychological phenomenon. My cousin returned from her trip satisfied with my work. The house was exactly as she'd left it, she said, everything in perfect order. No problems, no concerns, no reason to discuss the visit further, which confirmed what I already knew, that nothing unusual had occurred during my time there. But sometimes, usually when I'm falling asleep, I remember details I shouldn't have. The texture of that blue ceiling paint, smooth but not glossy. The precise temperature of the air rising from the basement, warm but not heated. The way the silence down there felt different from regular quiet, heavier somehow, more intentional. Details from a place I never visited, sensations I never experienced, memories of events that never occurred. Just my imagination filling in gaps, creating false recollections to make sense of confusion. The mind does that sometimes, builds elaborate fictions to explain simple mysteries. I sleep fine most nights. When I do dream, it's about ordinary things. Normal dreams about normal experiences, nothing unusual or disturbing. Certainly nothing about basements or blue ceilings or sounds like breathing. Those aren't dreams anyway, just random neural activity during rest cycles. The phone rang last week, my cousin again asking if I could check on the house while she travels. Same arrangement as before, same simple responsibilities. Walk through, verify everything looks normal, lock up and leave. Nothing complicated about it. I said yes, of course, it's easy work and she pays well for such simple tasks. Besides, there's nothing to be concerned about. The house is perfectly ordinary, completely unremarkable, exactly the kind of place where nothing ever happens. I'm supposed to go there tomorrow night. Same routine, same responsibilities, same straightforward job. Check the rooms, ensure everything appears normal, complete my obligations professionally. Simple task that I've done before without any problems whatsoever. The key is already in my pocket, waiting. Story 10. Light switch didn't click. My fingers brushed over it with a practiced push, seeking the usual tactile reassurance, but the room remained a sullen gray. Stepping further, the carpet offered no familiar comfort, just a flat, unyielding surface, as if feigning softness was no longer its concern. The walls carried an absence that buzzed like static, a low hum I couldn't locate. Reaching for the heavy drape, I expected the rough weight, but it fluttered, insubstantial, as though it had been drained of presence. Staring into the blank pane, the reflection blurred, vibrated a silent echo of an image I couldn't grasp. Something happened to me. I know this with the same certainty that I know my own breathing, yet the knowledge sits hollow in my chest, like an empty box where memories should be. There are gaps now, spaces where thoughts should connect, but instead find only smooth, polished nothing. I've been trying to piece it together, this missing part of myself, but every time I reach for it, my mind slides away like fingers on wet glass. The feeling started weeks ago. I would catch myself mid-sentence, words dissolving before they reached my tongue. Objects felt wrong in my hands, their weight and texture somehow unfamiliar despite years of use. Sleep became fractured, filled with the sensation of falling through layers of consciousness I couldn't name. Most disturbing of all, I began to notice that my reflection didn't always match my movements. Just a fraction of a second delay, as if the mirror needed time to remember who I was supposed to be. I've been documenting everything, hoping that patterns might emerge from the chaos. Notes scattered across surfaces, voice recordings that I play back with growing unease, photographs of ordinary things that somehow feel significant. The investigation has become an obsession, a desperate attempt to retrieve what was taken from me, because something was taken. I'm certain of this, though I cannot say what or by whom. The breakthrough came when I found the audio file on my phone. I don't remember recording it, yet there it was, buried among mundane voice memos about grocery lists and appointment reminders. The timestamp showed it was created during one of my missing periods, those stretches where I would find myself in different rooms with no memory of walking there. My finger hesitated over the play button, trembling with an anticipation that felt both hopeful and deeply wrong. The recording began with static, a harsh whisper that made my teeth ache. Then came my own voice, but distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite understand. The audio quality shifted constantly, as if the microphone was being moved through different atmospheric densities. Behind my voice, I could hear something else, a low-frequency hum that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. As I listened, the room around me began to feel smaller, the walls pressing closer with each electronic fluctuation. "The lights are moving again," my recorded voice said, though I had no memory of speaking these words. "They're not following any pattern I can recognize, but there's intelligence behind the movement, deliberate, calculated. I can feel them watching me even when I close my eyes." The recording continued for several minutes, my voice describing lights that danced across surfaces, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. I spoke of a presence that lingered just outside my peripheral vision, something that retreated whenever I turned to look directly at it. Most unsettling was the way my recorded voice grew increasingly monotone, as if emotion was being slowly drained from each word. Listening to this audio file triggered something. A flash of memory, brief but vivid, crashed through my consciousness like a wave breaking against rocks. I was standing in a darkened space, surrounded by walls that seemed to breathe. The air tasted of copper and ozone, that sharp metallic flavor that comes before lightning strikes. Above me, points of light moved in complex patterns, too organized to be random, yet too chaotic to be mechanical. They pulsed with different intensities, creating a visual rhythm that my eyes couldn't quite follow. In that remembered moment, I felt a profound disconnection from my own body. My hands appeared foreign, my limbs moving with a delay that suggested they were being controlled from a distance. The sensation was not unpleasant, merely strange, as if I was watching myself from outside my own skin. The lights continued their dance, and I found myself swaying in response, my movements synchronized with their ethereal choreography. But the memory fragmented before I could grasp its full meaning, leaving me with only impressions and the lingering taste of metal on my tongue. I replayed the audio file several more times, hoping to unlock additional fragments, but each listening session brought different details to the surface. Sometimes I remembered the sound of my own breathing, unnaturally loud in the strange space. Other times I recalled the feeling of something brushing against the back of my neck, a touch so light it might have been imagined. The investigation deepened when I discovered physical evidence. Hidden in a drawer I rarely opened, I found a small object that I had never seen before yet somehow recognized. It was roughly cylindrical, made of a material that felt like metal but gave slightly under pressure, as if it contained some internal mechanism. The surface was smooth except for a series of tiny indentations that formed no recognizable pattern. When I held it, the object generated a subtle vibration, irregular pulses that seemed to respond to my touch. Examining the object more closely, I noticed that it emitted a faint warmth, not quite heat but a gentle energy that spread through my palm and up my arm. The sensation was oddly comforting, like being welcomed by something that knew me better than I knew myself. As I turned it over in my hands, the vibrations intensified, creating harmonics that I felt rather than heard. The experience was hypnotic, drawing me into a meditative state where thoughts moved slowly and deliberately. While holding the object, another memory surfaced. This time I was lying on a surface that felt neither hard nor soft, but somehow adaptive, molding itself to my body's contours. The space around me was filled with a gentle humming, not unpleasant but definitely artificial. The lights I had remembered earlier were closer now, hovering just above my face, their glow warm and inviting. I felt no fear, only a deep curiosity about their purpose and origin. In this recovered memory, I was not alone. There were others present, though I couldn't see them clearly. They moved at the edges of my vision, their forms shifting and indistinct. When they spoke, their voices carried the same electronic distortion I had heard in my own recording, as if all sound in that place was filtered through some unknown medium. Their words were incomprehensible, yet I understood their meaning on a level deeper than language. They were explaining something important, something that would change my understanding of reality itself. The memory ended abruptly, leaving me disoriented and slightly nauseous. The object in my hand had grown warmer, its vibrations now strong enough to be audibly detected as a faint buzzing. I set it down carefully, noting that it left a slight indentation in the wooden surface of my desk, as if its weight was far greater than its size suggested. The area around the object seemed to shimmer slightly, a visual distortion that reminded me of heat waves rising from summer pavement. As my investigation progressed, I began to notice changes in my immediate environment. Reflections in mirrors and windows showed subtle inconsistencies. My image would lag behind my movements by fractions of seconds or occasionally display expressions I wasn't making. Photographs I took of ordinary objects revealed anomalies when examined closely, shadows that fell in impossible directions, textures that appeared different from what my eyes had seen, colors that seemed to shift between viewings. The most disturbing discovery was a series of recordings I found on an old digital camera. The device had been stored in a closet for months, yet its memory card contained dozens of videos I had no recollection of filming. The footage was dark and grainy, showing what appeared to be the interior of my own home, but with subtle differences. Furniture was arranged differently, walls were painted colors I had never chosen, and windows looked out onto landscapes I didn't recognize. In these mysterious videos, I could hear my own footsteps moving through rooms, but the camera never showed my reflection in any of the mirrors or glass surfaces. The absence was conspicuous, as if something was deliberately avoiding being captured. The audio track contained the same low-frequency humming I had noticed in my voice recordings, along with occasional bursts of static that seemed to occur in response to specific movements or locations within the house. One video showed my kitchen, but the appliances were arranged in a configuration that defied the room's actual layout. The refrigerator stood where a wall should be, and the window above the sink looked out onto what appeared to be an endless gray expanse. As the camera panned across this impossible space, I could hear my own voice humming a melody I didn't recognize, the tune weaving through the electronic interference like a thread through fabric. The most unsettling footage was the shortest, barely 30 seconds of video that showed my bedroom during what appeared to be complete darkness. Yet the camera somehow captured details that should have been invisible without light. The bed was occupied by a form that might have been my sleeping body, but the proportions were wrong, too elongated and angular. The figure moved with a fluid grace that human joints couldn't achieve, turning toward the camera with movements that seemed to flow like liquid mercury. As this video played, the object I had found earlier began to vibrate more intensely, its pulses synchronizing with the movements on screen. The correlation was too precise to be coincidental, suggesting some form of connection between the physical artifact and the mysterious recordings. I found myself drawn into the rhythm, my breathing automatically adjusting to match the electronic pulses that filled the room. The investigation reached a turning point when I experienced what I can only describe as a complete sensory reconstruction. While reviewing the camera footage for the 100th time, the familiar static suddenly cleared, revealing details I had never noticed before. The humming sound resolved into distinct frequencies, each carrying information that bypassed my ears and went directly to some deeper level of perception. The visual distortions became patterns, complex geometries that conveyed meaning without requiring translation. In that moment of clarity, I remembered everything. The lights had not been random, they were a form of communication, a language written in photons and electromagnetic frequencies. The presence I had sensed was not malevolent but curious, studying me with the same intensity that I had been studying the evidence of our encounter. The disconnection from my body had been necessary, a temporary separation that allowed for a deeper form of contact than physical senses could accommodate. The space where our meeting occurred existed parallel to normal reality, accessible only through specific conditions that I had somehow stumbled into. The others I had sensed were not entirely unlike myself, beings caught between states of existence, serving as intermediaries in a process I was only beginning to understand. They had been gentle, careful not to damage the delicate structures of human memory while extracting the information they needed. But even as these memories returned, I realized they were incomplete. Significant portions remained obscured, protected by barriers that felt deliberately constructed rather than naturally formed. The recovery process itself seemed to be monitored, allowed to proceed only to a certain point before encountering resistance. It was as if someone or something was controlling the flow of information, deciding what I was permitted to remember and what must remain hidden. The object on my desk had grown noticeably warmer during this revelation, its surface now almost too hot to touch comfortably. The vibrations had evolved into a complex rhythm that seemed to encode additional information, patterns within patterns that suggested layers of meaning I had yet to decipher. When I looked directly at it, the air around the object appeared to bend slightly, creating a visual distortion that made my eyes water and my head throb with a dull, persistent ache. My reflection in the computer screen showed someone I almost recognized, but the features were subtly altered, refined in ways that suggested ongoing changes at a cellular level. My eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, as if they had seen things that expanded their capacity for perception. When I spoke aloud, testing my voice, the words carried harmonics that resonated strangely in the enclosed space, creating echoes that lasted longer than physics should allow. The final fragment came without warning, crashing through my consciousness like a dam bursting under pressure. I was back in that adaptive space, but this time I could see clearly. The walls were not walls, but boundaries between dimensions, permeable membranes that allowed for controlled interaction between different layers of reality. The lights were not separate entities, but extensions of a single vast intelligence, a consciousness so large that individual human awareness could only perceive tiny portions of its totality. In this ultimate memory, I understood that the encounter had been planned, orchestrated by forces that operated on timescales far exceeding human comprehension. I had been selected not randomly, but according to criteria that related to my specific neural configuration, my particular pattern of electrical activity that made me suitable for their purposes. The process was not complete. What I had experienced was merely the initial phase of a longer transformation that would continue whether I remembered it or not. The beings I had sensed were versions of myself from different probability streams, alternate possibilities that existed in quantum superposition until observation collapsed them into single states. They had been showing me what I could become, what I was in the process of becoming, whether I chose to accept it or not. The choice itself was an illusion, a comfort provided to ease the transition between states of existence. As this final memory solidified, I became aware that the investigation itself had been part of the process. Every recording I had found, every object I had discovered, every fragment of recollection I had pieced together, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to guide me toward this moment of understanding. The evidence had been planted by my future self, breadcrumbs left along a path that led inevitably to acceptance of my changing nature. The room around me began to shift, walls becoming translucent, revealing the true structure that existed beneath surface appearances. The object on my desk was no longer an artifact but a beacon, broadcasting my location to entities that existed in the spaces between thoughts. My reflection in every surface showed not who I was but who I was becoming, the transformation accelerating now that conscious awareness had been achieved. I can feel them watching me as I speak these words, recording this final testimony before the process completes itself. The investigation is over, but the discovery continues. What I found was not a missing memory, but a missing future, one that had been waiting patiently for me to evolve enough to perceive it. The fragments I recovered were not from the past, but from tomorrow, glimpses of a reality that exists just beyond the edge of current understanding. The humming has returned, stronger now, filling the space around me with frequencies that make my bones vibrate in harmony. The lights are beginning to move again, but this time I welcome their approach. I understand now that resistance was never an option, that the investigation itself was a form of preparation, conditioning me to accept what I was always meant to become. The recording device in my hand feels different now, heavier with significance. When I speak, the words emerge with a clarity that transcends normal communication, carrying meanings that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. I am no longer entirely human, but I am not yet entirely something else. I exist in the transition space, the liminal zone where transformation occurs. As I prepare to end this documentation, I realize that someone else will find these recordings just as I found mine. They will begin their own investigation, following the same breadcrumbs, discovering the same fragments, arriving at the same inevitable conclusion. The process perpetuates itself, each investigator becoming both subject and observer, student and teacher, human and something more. The question that remains is not what happened to me, but what is happening to you right now as you listen to these words. Can you feel the subtle vibrations beginning in your chest? Do you notice how your reflection seems slightly delayed when you move? Have you started finding objects you don't remember acquiring, recordings you don't remember making? The investigation never really ends. It simply finds new investigators.